In today's show, it's a season review episode for Anfernee Simons. Is he a building block or a trade piece? Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter Mike Richmond. You are listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. It's free on all platforms, so make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same. It's Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're talking Anfernee Simons, continuing our season review. We've running down each player on the roster, and today it's Anfernee Simons' turn. We're going to spend the whole episode talking about Ant because I think he is such a fascinating part of what is next. The question here that I'm going to pose and kind of answer throughout the episode is whether Anfernee Simons is a building block, part of the next iteration of the Blazers, or whether he's a trade piece. Because I think we've reached a crossroads with him. So in today's show, we'll review Anfernee Simons' 23-24 season. We'll get a visit from Michael from the past and talk about my preseason predictions for Anfernee Simons, whether Ant hit his best or worst case scenario, and what that means based on what we thought in the preseason for the future. Then we'll talk about the future, because I think Ant's future in Portland is a fascinating question, and one that, quite frankly, I have changed my stance on. I don't know, dramatically or radically or anything like that, but I definitely have I have come around to the other side in my opinion with Anfernee Simons, and I will share that with you in the third segment. Let's start with his season review. On the year, Anfernee Simons averaged 22.5 points, a career high, 3.6 boards, and 5.5 assists, also a career high. Shot 43% from the floor, which included 38.5% from three on 8.8 attempts per game. Shot 39% on 9 threes a night. That's pretty darn good. And 91.6% at the foul line. Played in 46 games. That's not enough. And 34 minutes a night. He was hurt on opening night. I mean, that's kind of just it was a telling part of the Blazers season that night they couldn't get through night one without having one of their sort of core pieces or important pieces to evaluate all season long. I think core piece is actually a fine term. I don't know why I'm hedging. One of their important core pieces heading into the season couldn't make it through night one. He fractured his thumb against the Clippers, and then he missed the next 18 games. When Anfernee Simons came back, though, so he gets hurt on the road, he misses the next 18 games, a totally disjointed start of the season because of it, for the whole roster, honestly, because the Blazers were counting on Ant to be such a huge part of their offense. I'll talk about more how I kind of feel about him as a part of their offense in a little bit, but they were he was such a big part of the plan. And when he got hurt, it totally derailed many, many, many of the plans, and Scoot Henderson wasn't ready, and Malcolm Brogdon was brand new, and it was just a mess, right? It was a mess. So, but when Anfernee Simons got back, he had a monster December. Do not get it twisted. When he returned from injury, he was awesome. In 10 games in December, he averaged 28 points, 3.2 rebounds, and 5.4 assists. 28 and 5.5 dimes. Shot north of 40% from three. I'm back up there in the 9 attempts a game range. That was the by far the best stretch of his season. He was a monster in December. It didn't last. And in January and February, he struggled. Coming out of the All-Star break, he was a little bit better, but in December, he played in those 10 games in December. Obviously, relatively small sample size relative to the rest of the season, 10 of 82. But in those 10 games, he had 4 30-point games. And he scored 25 plus 7 out of 10 games in December. Monster December, right? And Ant's value is that he is a really good offensive player. He's bad on defense. He vowed to be better on defense this year. He was not. He's a bad defensive player. His value, where you're going to derive value from Anfernee Simons, is that he is an elite, high volume, high efficiency offensive player. That is where he's going to be really good. In December, he was that, right? And when you're scoring 28 on high efficiency, it is easier to work around what you cannot do. Then in January and February, he struggled. And that's when it becomes this sort of glaring frustration with like, well, he has these negatives. Like he can't defend. He has struggles with physicality. He's not really a natural playmaker, although he's certainly improved in that department. And in the next 23 games in January until March 1st, Simons scored 30 just 3 times. 4 in 10 games in December, 3 over the next 23 games. If you want to cut it at 25 and not 30, you could say he scored 7 out of his 10 games. He had 25 plus in December, and then he had 8 30-point games in January and February combined. Obviously, you take a couple weeks off in January and in February for the All-Star break, but like in those 23 games, 8 25-point games. In December, he was scoring at a high clip. And if he doesn't score, it feels worse because everything else gets more pronounced. That's just the fundamental truth of what Anfernee Simons is as a player. He has to be Anfernee to be valuable. If he's just a dude on offense, if he's like, oh yeah, he's a pretty good offensive player, he's not that good. If he is excellent on offense, which he's capable of being, as he's shown, then it kind of changes the calculations. He found it in March, like he found the rhythm in March. He really, his shooting came back around, and he had some big games. 34 and 14 assists against Minnesota, probably his best game of the year. Against the number 1 defense, he has an efficient night where he gets everyone involved. Blazers lost because they're not very good, but like that was a monster game. He had 29 and 5 against Oklahoma City, like 2 of the best teams in the West, right? And those are good, kind of finding it good games in March. And he had a big game in a win over Atlanta, 36 points, 7 boards, 8 assists, and a home win over the Hawks. Like he found it in March. He got hurt, missed basically all of November and played 1 game in October. Comes back in December, monster season, like monster run to begin his season in earnest, and then struggles in January and February and finds it again in March. And then he has tendonitis in his knee. He tries to play a game against the Clippers on March 22nd, leaves early, clearly injured, like clearly not right, limps off the court and does not return for the final 12 games of the season. So he missed the first 18 in the last 12. That's 30 games. Like that is the last 12. Like, when he got hurt that night, Chauncey Billups said, I don't think it's that serious. The Blazers were trying to lose. It's hard to know how many games he would have played, but he clearly had to leave that game that night after playing about 22 minutes. So I think he would have played more, but let's say he plays 6 of the last 12, right? That's still 52 games. It's too many to miss. It's just they need more of Anfernee Simons on the court. He hasn't been traditionally someone who deals with a bunch of injuries. This hasn't been like a part of his career, even when he's been playing more minutes. Most of the time he's missed because the Blazers have held him out due to injuries with quotation marks around them. But this was a season where availability was part of the story for Ant. I think it was also the story, and I think this is undeniable, is that this was the year that Anfernee Simons was going to, full-time starter. He was going to step into this role. No Damian Lillard, full-time starter, full-time point guard, kind of like the guy, much more of like this opportunity to step into a larger role and fill both skill-wise and sort of like a emotional leader type of position for him as a veteran on a very young team. And I think he proved, at least to me, and you might have a different opinion on this, and that's the beauty of it, but at least to me, that he's not ready or not, and probably not capable of being the lead guy on a decent to good team. I think he has some obvious offensive skills that would make him valuable on teams that could hide his deficiencies a little bit better. But I think it's pretty clear after watching this season, and obviously he didn't play a ton, but he played a bunch when he played. He's playing 35 minutes a night. I think it's clear to me after this season that Ant is not going to be a franchise pillar, future all-star type of guy. He can be a good player for a long time. I think, and you'll hear from Michael in the past in a little bit, I think the offensive production, I think he's going to score 20 points per game pretty much wherever you drop him in the league, because I think he's the ability to shoot off the dribble, the ability to shoot off the catch, his improving in between game, the shooting and the ability to shoot with, to create your own shots with the ball in your hand. There's value there. But he's not a great rim pressure guy still. He doesn't get to the free throw line with any regularity. He's not a great playmaker. He's improved a great deal over the last few years as a playmaker, but he's not this like elite, even like Trae Young type of, Trae's a great playmaker, but like that type of playmaker where it's like, well, he does like, he can carve you up in a couple different ways. He scores. That's what he does. And I think that has value, but I think what we saw this season, and for me, what I saw this season was someone who's not capable of being the guy on a team, on a decent to good to above team. He's probably a third-ish option. I know people like to say sixth man. I think that's a weird distinction. People used to say that about CJ McCollum, and I feel like CJ McCollum's best role was when he was a starter, but he played on a team that had more creators and more size around him. If you can find the role starting or otherwise, six man or starting or otherwise, like as long as you are the third option on offense and some of your deficiencies, playmaking and defense, are covered up by your teammates, that's fine. I don't think Anfernee Simons has to be someone who comes off the bench. I think that is like a weird thing that like specifically gets laid at the feet of offense first combo guards. And I understand why, because that's like the quintessential sixth man, right? And certainly Anfernee Simons could feast as a sixth man in the right system, but I don't think he has to be that, right? I don't think he's so poor. I don't think he's so bad that he's like, he can't start. Like, I think that's silly, right? But I do think he has some deficiencies that need to be covered up by his teammates, and the Blazers have not had a roster that is capable of doing that. And he had some opportunities to kind of step forward and be better this year, and he wasn't. I'm not putting this at the feet of the Blazers roster construction, although that is certainly a big part of it. Lack of space on offense, lack of creativity on offense, all of those things, right? But the best players kind of plow through it in a way that I don't think Anfernee Simons did. So where does that leave us with Ant, right? Like where does that put us with Anfernee Simons? Well, let's revisit my preseason predictions about best and worst case scenarios, and then kind of talk about where Ant landed and what that means about his present and his future with the Blazers. That's what we'll do in the second segment. Join me there, won't you? Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. It's the place for online therapy. Therapy can be incredibly valuable to you if you're dealing with a major traumatic event. So if there's something big in your life, a major trauma that you're working through, go talk to a therapist. A neutral third party can be incredibly valuable. But if you're just dealing with the regular bumps and bruises that come with trying to navigate life, the ups and downs of just existing out in the world, talking to a neutral third party, go talk to a therapist. It can help. So if you are thinking about starting therapy, if you think about trying therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Therapy can be different for everyone, and most of us have a problem, whether it is big or small, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. BetterHelp can be a solution for you because it's entirely online, it's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. One more time because I screwed up the URL, BetterHelp.com/lockedonnba. All right. So let's talk a little Anfernee Simons. Let's continue our chat here because I think, like I said, for me, I think he is a guy who I think it's pretty clear that he can't be like a 1A type of player on a decent to above team. I think he has too much offensive skills to say like he's no good or anything. Like, everyone wants to trade him to the Orlando Magic. Would he help the Orlando Magic? Absolutely. Absolutely. If you just plugged him into the team, like if he just played the minutes Markelle Fultz played, they would be a lot better because they could use his shooting. They've got two big primary creators in Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero, who can kind of make up for some of Anfernee Simons' playmaking deficiencies that allow him to play off the ball. They're gigantic, which would allow his defensive struggles to be hidden a little bit, or at least more help behind him for his defensive struggles. Like, he could help on the right team. The Blazers don't have the roster that can be hidden by. And then you get to sort of when you're best skills, like they did for Anfernee Simons this season, don't shine for long stretches. And that 25-game stretch in January and February when he was struggling, when your best skills aren't there and you're like a 20-point per game scorer on decent efficiency, then your deficiencies really show up. And I think that's where I am with Ants. And I want to visit Michael from the past for a moment. In my preseason, I do best and worst case scenarios for every player on the team, and it's best case within reason and without injury. And I'm going to play this for you, and I usually don't do this, but I want you to pay attention to what Michael from the past says about Anfernee Simons' best case scenario. He doesn't mention something I don't know why I'm talking in third person removed here. I don't mention something in best case scenario, and I want to see if you catch it before I tell you about it on the other end. Michael from the past, take it away, you handsome dog. The best case scenario is that he ups his efficiency from 3, back up to north of 40%, continues to be a more active attacker of the rim and continues to improve in that area as well, gets to the free throw line more often, shoots upwards of 68, 69, 70% at the rim, even 60, even just north of 65. Any improvement at the rim on increased volume, he's going to be a really, really good offensive player. He's developed an in-between game with a little running hook shot and a bunch of floaters he puts up. If he continues to just be a little bit more efficient at what he does, improve slightly on his weaknesses as a guy who gets to the rim and gets to the foul line a little bit more and gets back up to north of 40% from 3, all very doable for someone of his skill set. You're talking about, 25-4, 23-5. A best case scenario is that Anfernee Simons is a little bit better with a little more responsibility now that Damian Lillard is out of the lineup. The worst case scenario is that he kind of plateaus and that he's a 37% three-point shooter, which is still above average in the league on volume. It's still like a darn good shooter, but that, the lack of physicality, he just doesn't take the step forward and he regresses a little bit as a rim finisher. He doesn't get to the free throw line any more often. And without the sort of gravity and space that playing off of Damian Lillard offers you, he just isn't as good as he has been. But the worst case for Anfernee Simons still probably looks like 20 and 3 assists. The worst case scenario, though, is that with that sort of plateau, he's like, oh, shucks, he's a 20 and 4 guy. Like, darn. But that his lack of defensive ability catches up with him, and that on a team that is transitioning into the next era, it becomes increasingly clear that playing Anfernee Simons at 2 guard for the next version of the Blazers is untenable. And that's the problem. Thank you, Michael from the past. Look, I think Anfernee Simons pretty clearly, the pendulum swung towards that worst case scenario. Because what Michael from the past was talking about at the end was that it became relatively clear that playing Anfernee Simons at shooting guard on this team, particularly next to Scoot Henderson, is probably untenable. You just can't do it. Ant cannot play. He cannot play consistently in a lineup where he is not the smallest guy on the floor. Because he's going to get picked on defense. The thing I didn't mention in the best case scenario is anything about his defense, because I do not think, and I did not think in the fall, that there was a best case scenario where Anfernee Simons morphed into a good defensive player. We've seen it for long enough to know that his ceiling probably on that end is something like a below average defensive player. He was bad this year on defense. Some of the advanced metrics suggest that he was the worst defensive player in the league. That's EPM, my favorite of the alphabet soup metrics, defensive EPM. That's estimated plus minus from dunksandthrees.com. I don't know about that. Again, it's kind of imperfect. I don't know if he was the 450th best defensive player in the league, but he was a bad one. I don't think you need to take the rankings at face value, but I think the sort of does this advanced metric suggest Anfernee Simons was really bad on defense? It does. Then I think that's what you need to know, right? That becomes the telling thing. And the best version of Anfernee Simons is going to be playing him around big wings, him around size. I think what we saw this year was the physicality, as also mentioned in that worst case scenario. It could overwhelm him at times. And yet, I value what Anfernee Simons brings to the Blazers offense a great deal. I've said in this show, and maybe gotten some pushback from a vocal minority on the internet, that I think he was the Blazers' best guard this season. I don't think it was close. Like, I think he's the best guard. Even if Malcolm Brogdon's numbers are better and all that, the way that Anfernee Simons gets defensive attention, I think he's better because I value that advantage creation. When you double team someone at 28, 29, 30 feet from the rim, and you can get a 4-on-5 behind them, that has value. I think Anfernee Simons brings that value to the floor. But his deficiencies showed up too loudly this year. They were too loud and too obvious. And it isn't that Anfernee Simons can't play, as I've mentioned now several times. It's that he can't play. He cannot be the second smallest dude on the court. You cannot build a roster where he regularly plays shooting guard next to another point guard that is smaller than him. And it's like big shouldered, giant, long arms, big hands as Scoot Henderson is. He's still like 6'2". Like, he isn't a tall person. He's short. He's not like small by point guard standards, but he is small by the rest of the NBA standards, right? Like all of the other players in a league filled with tall people. And the league is going bigger in general. Length is like important. A lot of like big wings has been the trend for teams that have won consistently in the league over the last decade. Ant probably has to be a point guard, and ideally a point guard where he doesn't have all of the creation responsibilities, right? Like, he can be a primary creator sometimes, but he can also be an off-ball guy. Like, there are easy roster constructions where Anfernee Simons fits in and you plug him in and he still gets double teams and he's still like, and I think there's value there. He struggled this year and he shot 38% from three, almost 39% from three on 9 attempts per game. The shooting is there and real. The ability to shoot off the bounce is a real skill. I just think that it became clear in terms of best and worst case scenario that Anfernee Simons is not a reasonable fit on this particular iteration of the Blazers. But this iteration of the Blazers is short term. It's temporary. Who knows what's next? In fact, it's one of the most fascinating parts about the season is we don't really have any idea what's next. It is really, they have an obvious sort of path, but how they go down that path is hard to know. And in the past, I have said that it didn't make sense to rush to trade Anfernee Simons because both the young guards, Shaedon Sharpe and Scoot Henderson, were a long way away from being as good as Anfernee Simons, not close to as good as he is right now, and no guarantee that they ever get as good. So the rush to trade Anfernee Simons just didn't make sense to me. I've changed my tune. I don't think that anymore. Let me share with you what I think in the third segment. Join me there. Let's talk about whether Anfernee Simons what Anfernee Simons' future in Portland is, because whether he's a building block or a trade chip is the biggest question. And my stance has changed. Let me share it with you to close the show. Join me there, won't you? First, let me tell you that today's show is brought to you by the good folks over at DoorDash. They want to come put a smile on your mom's face or a mother figure in your life, whoever that might be. If your mom's got a sweet tooth, if she's a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur, if she's outdoorsy, no matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or a flower bouquet, or a makeup, or tech gear, workout wear, and more. You can pair flowers with a beverage from her favorite coffee shop and then have same-day delivery and get DoorDash to bring it right to her. Or if you want to order ahead, DoorDash lets you schedule orders on the app so you can say, hey, listen, I know Mother's Day is this Sunday, May 12th. Those of you who don't know, you are listening to Tuesday, May 7th show. Mother's Day is this Sunday. Get on it and use DoorDash to help you. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. Get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's Locked on NBA. Order using DoorDash. Terms apply. All right, still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond. You are still listening to Locked On Blazers. Let's talk about my changing stance on Anfernee Simons. So this was like at the trade deadline that I thought like, hey, I don't think the Blazers have to trade Anfernee Simons. And I think I even shared this maybe before that we got to the trade deadline, is that I don't think that leading up to that, to, February of 2024, that the Blazers needed to trade Anfernee Simons. And the logic was that Scoot Henderson didn't look very good his rookie year. Certainly has some upside and all of those things, but like the real truth is that he wasn't good. Certainly by like just can you play in the NBA right now standards, Scoot was bad. By rookie standards, Scoot was learning, we'll call it, right? And the idea that Scoot would ever be a guy who averages 22 and 5.5 assists and shoots 39% from the floor, it might be far-fetched. He might never be as good as Anfernee Simons. And while Shaedon Sharpe seems to have a ton of talent, whether he ever unlocks that talent and puts together for consistent stretches, which we just haven't seen in his 2 years in the league. We've seen small stretches, but not like a season's worth of being a guy who scores 20 plus in the league, much less several now for Anfernee Simons, or 2 for Anfernee Simons. Like we just, for the young guards, it didn't make sense in my mind to trade Ant because they weren't as good as him in the moments, and there's no guarantee they'll ever be as good as him. And Anfernee Simons isn't old. Like, he's been in the league a long time. He's heading into year 7 this season. He's a veteran in the NBA, but he came in so young. He's only 24, be 25 next season. Like, he's still a very young, not like incredibly young. He's not forever 19 like Jason Tatum, but like he's not like way outside of the timeline, right? Like, he's still growing towards his physical prime, which will be the next, say 3 to 4 seasons, or however long it is now in the age of LeBron James. Now we think it goes till you're 36 or something. But like it is, my stance has changed. I don't think the Blazers have to trade Anfernee Simons. I don't think it's a capital H have to trade Anfernee Simons, but I think they should. That's what's changed for me. And I think it's changed because watching the second half of Anfernee Simons' season, after that monster December, the struggles in January and February, and then getting it together in March, I kind of landed on what I've shared with you already in the show, is that I just don't think he's like a 1 or 1A type of option on offense. He's good enough on offense that he could help the right team. The Blazers, as currently constructed, are not that team, and building a team around what Anfernee Simons' skills are doesn't seem like the path forward. The moment the Blazers drafted Scoot Henderson, in my eyes, they made a choice. They'd already prioritized Scoot over Anfernee Simons by picking Scoot Henderson 3rd overall in the draft. If they didn't want to have a point guard to crowd out their future youngster, and I think they knew that Dame was pretty much gone as soon as they decided to make the pick anyways. They're as smart as we are, and many of us here in the Blazers regular watchers world knew that if the Blazers made the pick on draft night, it was probably the end of the Damian Lillard era. So like, not only do they know they were squeezing out Dame, they knew that they were squeezing out other young guards on the roster as well. They made a choice. Could it work? They played 600 minutes together this season. That's not a ton, but it's a lot of minutes. It was awful. The pairing did not work at all. It was bad. So here's where I've landed. I think they should trade Anfernee Simons this summer. They don't have to. Like, I won't, have the pitchfork out if Ant's on the roster in the fall. But Simons has 2 years remaining on his contract. He has this season, this upcoming season, and next, which means next summer he'll be an expiring contract, which means teams won't have 2 off seasons or maybe 2 playoff runs to convince Anfernee Simons to stick around. He'll be an unrestricted free agent after that. You just have a lot less team control. He becomes less appealing to trade for some teams. Although perhaps expiring contracts will have more value in the future based on the new CBA. We'll see. I think there's a chance expiring contracts will be back in vogue, but perhaps not. We I guess we're going to find out over the next 12 months how it works. But like in general, team control has been typically more valued by teams than expirings, as like in a decade ago, 15 years ago, when expiring contracts were a little more in vogue. But I think Anfernee Simons has trade value. Whatever that trade value might be, it's hard to know. Is he going to get you 3 first-round picks? No. Is he going to get you 2 juicy first-round picks? I doubt it. But is he going to get you probably a good first-round pick and some other stuff? I think so. I think that's a reasonable trade package. He's probably the most tradable piece on the roster. His contract at $25 million roughly a year is good value for what Anfernee Simons brings. Anyone telling you that Anfernee Simons is overpaid doesn't understand the economics of the NBA. He's pretty fairly paid. I think he's really like a very much a tradable, useful contract to be traded. The problem is his deficiencies on defense and his sort of lack of playmaking, and he was below average in as an effective field goal and on effective field goal percentage and true shooting percentage. The best version of Anfernee Simons is a high volume, high efficiency offensive player. We saw it very briefly this season, and then we saw it like in December and March. Otherwise, we didn't really see it. A disjointed middle stretch there, the middle half of his year. I think the Blazers, because I don't think Anfernee Simons is good enough to pull them out of whatever of this, right? Like, I don't think he's going to be good enough to say, oh, well, once Anfernee Simons like grows into what he's going to be, he'll be this superstar and he'll be able to like, be the building block of whatever is next, or like this foundational piece of what next. I think he's a good player that could help a certain type of team that needs his skill sets, particularly the one in Orlando, and I think the Blazers should explore moving him because they're committed to this rebuild. When you draft a 19-year-old who didn't play college basketball, followed by a 19-year-old who didn't play college basketball in back-to-back drafts, you are committed to a long tail rebuild around those parts. You draft a couple top 10 picks. They're going to have another probably top 5 pick this year. They're likely to have 4 consecutive picks in the top 10, if not 4 consecutive picks, or 3 in the top 5, 4 in the top 7 over the next 4 drafts. When Joe Cronin said we're probably not going to be good until our young players are ready, I don't think he meant Anfernee Simons. I think they know what they have to do this summer, and I think it's time. Is it a wild criminal offense if they wait until the trade deadline? It's not. I don't think so. I don't think that's that big of a deal. But I don't see a world in which Anfernee Simons' trade value skyrockets. Perhaps the market changes, but if you keep giving the team sort of like, don't worry, the market will get better, eventually the time just keeps on ticking, and the linear passage of time can only hurt Anfernee Simons' trade value in my mind because he only has so much time left on his contract. Some of this stuff is finite. The Blazers should explore, have to explore trading Anfernee Simons this summer for the good of the franchise. Not because he's bad, not because he is some sort of cancerous piece, but precisely because he can get you some useful things back in a trade, and because he's not quite good enough to be the thing that pulls you out of the mud. The thing that pulls you out of the mud is either the emergence of Shaedon Sharpe or Scoot Henderson, or a draft pick that they have not made yet. Or, heck, who you trade Anfernee Simons for, right? If you nail that pick or nail that trade and you get a young veteran that helps and a pick and you kind of accelerate things there, then Anfernee Simons is the guy who helps you pull you out of the mud. I view Anfernee Simons' future in Portland to be numbered. I think when he said at his exit interview that he's entering year 7 and he doesn't want to play on a team. He wants to play in a competitive team, competitive games next season, and be on a team that's looking to win and play in the playoffs. I hope he gets his wish, because I hope they get him somewhere where he can play and he can win and he can show what he does well, and hopefully they can hide what he doesn't do well, because those things are real as well. His skills and his deficiencies are real all the same. And I hope Anfernee Simons gets into the spot where he can do the things that he does. And hopefully the Blazers make this decision, commit to the direction they've already chosen over the last 2 off seasons, and go through with it, because it's time. They chose this path, time to walk it. And quite frankly, I bet the Blazers do it. I bet they do it. I think they know too. That is going to do it for today's show. Tell your friends about the podcast. Tell them they can get it wherever they get podcasts, and also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I will talk to you soon.